Brothers and sisters, let's welcome Steve Stevenson. Steve.
So, do you think there's too much light or enough light or? Thank you. So do I just advance it? Oh, no, he's bringing it up. Okay. Sure. Here we go. So I'm mostly going to be talking tonight about climbing in a mountain range called the Karakoram. And the Karakoram is located where Pakistan, India, and China all come together. It'd be northeastern Pakistan. It'd be the very tippy top of India. The map behind me is a map of India before, when the British were still there, before it was partitioned into India and Pakistan. And there was an area up way north called Kashmir. And many of you know that Kashmir is a disputed area between India, Pakistan, and China. And so the Karakoram is inside Kashmir, and so it's all wrapped up in the dispute over Kashmir as well. So at least places we go climbing in Kashmir, I've actually been climbing in India, Pakistan, Chinese parts of Kashmir. Is there a pointer on this? Maybe not. I'll just skip that. Can you see okay, or is this too much light in here? You can see okay? Okay. K2, that's maybe a little better. This is the side of K2 from Pakistan, which is the most commonly climbed side of the mountain. But we climbed this mountain in 1990. This was my third attempt on the peak, but we climbed it from the north side, from the Chinese side. And the north side of K2 is very desolate and dry. There are no people that live there. It's a big kind of mountainous desert. And so all of the supplies for our expedition had to be transported to the mountain on camels. And the big problem we had was the rivers, where we had to wade through deep rivers, but the camels could go through the rivers. And you can see it's very dry, rocky terrain. In this particular river was quite frightening to ride the camels across because the water was very swift. Actually, one of the camels got washed away, but the person riding on the camel, and the camel was okay, but it was quite dramatic. But we had to walk up a long glacier, make a advanced base camp at about 17,000 feet, and it took us probably a couple of months to climb the mountain. These are my two good friends, Rasul on the right and Fidal Hussein, but this is in 1990, so that's what, 26 years ago now. And Rasul on the right has been on every trip with me to Pakistan since 1987. He's an old friend. So I'll just kind of run through. This was our second camp. It's a steep mountain. We did the third ascent of this route. It had been first climbed by Japanese, then Italians, and then we did the third ascent. This was our third camp at about 25,000 feet, and looking off to the north, you can see that it's kind of the end of the mountains and turns into kind of a dry, mountainous desert from there. Above our third camp, we ended up traversing out onto this big glacier and had a final camp and early the next morning. We climbed just each of us separately to the summit during as a storm was approaching, so we had to go quite quickly. That's a picture of me. I kind of got ahead of the rest of the group a little bit because I was concerned about the time. And when I got to the top of K2, you could see it was quite foggy. The storm was just about to break. And so I hurried back down the other side As I was going down, my friend Greg Child was still on his way up. And the next day we had a long descent in stormy weather. And our friend Rasul made us a nice feast that was quite a bit like the snacks you have over here. After we climbed K2, it was very, 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 very good. My friends, since I went to the summit by myself and came down while they were still on their way up, they were teasing me about whether I really made the summit or not. So on the way out, I hiked up some other peaks to kind of see where we had been, and I could see that I actually went to the top of K2. So that was really a first major success for me of climbing big mountains was K2 in 1990. I'm going to actually show a few pictures here of Mount Everest, which is not in the Karakoram, but I did climb Mount Everest a few years later. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I actually think Mount Everest is kind of a boring mountain now. Everybody's climbing it as part of big commercial trips, and Sherpas carrying lots of oxygen, and it doesn't really, it's not very difficult to do, but we did kind of, I did sort of, I did it without supplementary oxygen, which I thought was kind of challenging. We climbed, which was kind of like the left skyline that we could see here from the Pong La, which is we were climbing Everest from the Chinese side as well, from Tibet. And so you take these Chinese trucks over this Pong La where you could see that view of Everest. And then we hired all these Tibetan porters. We gave each one of them a little tag and a porter load, and these guys carried our loads up the valley from the village of Karta. And from our base camp, we wanted to climb the Kangshung face on Mount Everest, which is rarely done. This side of Everest gets seldomly visited, and we wanted to climb up a route kind of on the left of the screen up to that saddle there, and then up the left-hand ridge. This side of the mountain had been climbed twice before, so we wanted to try to make the third ascent. We climbed on this sort of rocky buttress that sticks out because avalanches come down either side, and so it's very steep and technical climbing, ice and rock, down low. And then once we got up higher on the peak, it was more, it wasn't quite as steep, and it was just walking up lower angled snow slopes. That's another peak in the background called Makalu. From here, we wanted to get up to the pass at the top there, which we'd get on the normal route that people climb from Nepal, the Southeast Ridge. But we were very concerned about the snow, and it seemed like it was very hazardous with a lot of new snow and avalanche hazard. So we came down. Whoops. And then I went around to another route on the north side of Everest where a friend of mine had a permit, and climbed up the North Ridge and the Northeast Ridge. The people I was with, they didn't go all the way. They'd stopped at a lower camp, and I just continued on by myself, and had a wonderful day going to the summit of Everest by myself about, this was late May in 1994. There's one spot where the rock climbing is quite steep, and some people had put a ladder there, so that was nice for me because I could just climb along there and use the ladder. And it was nice weather as I'm approaching the summit, but when I got to the top, it was cloudy. So I couldn't really see anything other than some of these stakes that people had put in the snow at the top. After the Everest trip, I kind of decided I didn't want to climb these big mountains where lots of people go that, like on Everest, it wasn't a very good experience. There were a lot of people there that I thought didn't show good, manners or way of conducting themselves in the mountains that I'm used to and that I like. So I kind of started getting back to kind of my roots of technical climbing, and I like to spend the winters up in Canada climbing frozen waterfalls. So this is I live up in Canmore, Alberta in the winter doing this sort of thing. And this is a picture of me climbing one of the routes that's kind of in my backyard. These are some other climbs in the Canadian Rockies. Doing rock climbing on El Capitan in Yosemite is a favorite thing to do. And we can spend the night in the portaledges there. Or just moving really quickly on stone. This is a friend of mine, Conrad Anker, where we climbed a route on El Cap in one day, the nose. Big wall climbing in Alaska. But then I went on some more trips to Pakistan, starting, this trip was in 2004, kind of going with a different generation of climbers. This is my friend Steve House. A lot of the climbers my age had sort of stopped doing these kinds of trips, so I'm climbing with younger climbers. And we did the first ascent of this peak here in 2004 called Kapura Peak. It's about 6,500 meters. Took us 3 days. I like the picture of this guy here. He's having fun. And we also did a new route on this peak here called Nasser Brock. And we did a route right up the line where the sun is divided from the shade. This route on this peak had never been climbed before, and we had an opportunity to do that beautiful ridge on that peak. This is just some pictures from that climb. Steep rock climbing with Steve and another guy who's a friend of ours from Slovenia named Marco. And from the summit, we could see, this is Kapura Peak on the right, and then the big peak on the left is called K6, and that K6 story comes up a little bit later, because I went on a trip to K6 from the other side last year. So we'll talk about K6 some more in a little bit. After that trip in 2004 from where we did those peaks in the Charkusa Valley like Kapura and Nasser Brock, we went from there to Nanga Parbat. Nanga Parbat is in Pakistan and on the other side of the Indus River, and so we drove up and through the Deosai Plain, which is a national park in Pakistan that's dedicated to try to preserve the Himalayan brown bear. The Himalayan brown bear is a lot like the grizzly bear in North America. It's a subspecies of brown bear, and I got some pictures of the national park. But just four of us, Steve on the right, and then Bruce Miller and myself, and then Doug Chabot on the left. And when we went to Nanga Parbat, Steve and Bruce were trying to do a new route on the big route on the Rupal Face, and Doug and I were trying to do the first ascent of this long, long ridge called the Mazeno Ridge, which I'm going to talk about. The Mazeno Ridge, you can see it when you're flying on the jet from Islamabad to Skardu. You fly right over Nanga Parbat, and the Mazeno Ridge is this long, long ridge you can see in the sunlight coming out from the peak. This Mazeno Ridge had never been climbed before, so this was our goal in 2004 to try to do that. And this is driving from Skardu across the Deosai Plain, and this is the national park where it's the critical habitat for the Himalayan brown bear. We got to a village called Tarshing, and then hiked up the Rupal Valley. And right here is a picture of Nanga Parbat, the summit on the right, and then this long, long ridge off to the left. That's the Mazeno Ridge that had never been climbed. And our idea was we would start up the left side, climb on this ridge is about 10 kilometers, like about 6 miles long. And then when we got to the peak, there's kind of a ridge that comes down. That way we would descend, and we'd go up. And that had been climbed before. It's called the Shell Route. So we were going to climb the Mazeno Ridge, the Shell Route, go to the summit, come down, back to the ridge, and then down the Shell Route. That was our plan. And I was just Doug and myself. And so we moved quickly along the ridge. Beautiful, beautiful climbing with lots of fluted snow, and it's quite committing to get on this ridge because once you're on it, you can't go down either side because it's too dangerous. You either have to go back the way you came or you have to finish it. We spent 4 days on the ridge and just climbing. You can see our tracks if you look carefully in some of these places. This is looking back from where we'd already been. And this is looking forward to where we're going. And you can see the shell route kind of going down to the right. That was our descent route. And you're going up and down over these towers. Sometimes you get to the top and you have to rappel down your ropes on the other side to climb back up again. It's a lot of up and down. This is the actual summit pyramid of Nanga Parbat. And we did make it to the gap just beyond that snow slope in the foreground, but then the weather got bad, and I was not feeling that well, so we decided we would go down the shell route, wait for the weather to get better, come back up the shell route, and go to the summit. But we made a big mistake. We didn't think we'd need our rope going down, so we cached our rope and all our food for when we came back, because our friends told us we wouldn't need it. And we ended up getting to a spot where we thought we were trapped, because we walked out on this rock ridge way down in the clouds in the stormy weather, and there was no we needed a rope to get down. So after thinking about it for a while, we went back up the slope and found a small piece of rope sticking out of the ice from old expeditions that had climbed the shell route maybe 20 years before us, and we chopped about 70 feet of old rope out of the ice, and that's what we used the next. Then we had to spend the night kind of an open bivouac there, and the next day we actually had to use the rope to get ourselves down, which was making these short rappels in a couple of spots. But we were able to find our way down. It was a long, long descent, and this is Doug and myself after we finished the route. How you guys doing? Yeah. In 2005, I went on another trip to Pakistan with my wife and one of my sons, which was a good experience for him. He had never really been there before. Neither had my wife. And we went trekking up into Hushay with my friend Rasul over there on the right, and his father on the left, and his two daughters and his son Fidali and his wife in the back. And that was a good experience for my younger son, because he'd really never been in small villages in the mountains or in rural Pakistan where people are quite poor, and to see that. So it was a good experience for him. This was our trekking group here. The guy who's leading us here, Nadeem, he comes up in a story later too, so you can remember that. A couple of years later, we went on another trip in the central Karakoram to this peak, the second peak from the left, called Latok 2, and we did the first alpine-style ascent of Latok 2. These peaks here on Latok peaks are probably the hardest mountains in the world to climb. The Latok 1, the highest peak in the group, has only been climbed once, and maybe 35 expeditions have tried it since then, and none have succeeded. Very difficult mountains to climb. And you can see from the pictures, because it's quite steep and technical. This is the easy part here, just up the steep snow, but then you get into this steep rock climbing like this, where you're just scratching your way up with your crampons and your ice tools, and here we got to the upper snow slopes, and then the weather got bad. We were able to climb through the clouds and get to the summit in a storm, and make our way back down. And what's beautiful about these places in Pakistan, they have these huge long glaciers in the Karakoram that are the largest glaciers on the planet outside the polar regions. And this here is the Biafo Glacier. I'm guessing the Biafo Glacier is 30 or 40 miles long. And it's just bare ice. We're just walking on the bare ice right now. You could drive a car on this. It's amazing. It's just, you could ride your bicycle on it. It's this part of it. But it's really quite beautiful, and it was late in the season. You can see the the fall colors starting to turn on the hillside. And, you know, some of these trekking groups, they leave garbage, and so with our porters, we try to teach them about conservation and leave no trace, so that if we see a camp that's been, that previous groups have left a mess, then we try to clean it up. We take all the cans and we flatten them and we put them in the porter loads to carry them out, and we burn the trash, and things like if it's organics, we'll bury it in a hole in the ground and try to clean up the campsite and try to show the porters there how to do that, so that then they can keep their own backyard clean. We also are involved with different groups there that have been working on girls' education in the mountains there in Pakistan. And so we visited, Doug has a small NGO that he works with some schools, and we visited them when we were there and to see what they were doing, and that was great. In 2007, we went back to the Latoks to try to climb this north face of Latok 1, this peak that's had the 35 expeditions but only climbed one time. And we made another attempt to try to climb this, but like everybody else, we got it pretty high. We had one camp there on the ridge there, and the next morning we left there and climbed up to steep snow and ice. And then this is where we made our last camp, was in this cave that we dug on the ridge. Quite spectacular spot, actually. But we had good anchors for ourselves to the rock in behind the snow, so we were all tied in. And but you can see, you know, what a beautiful mountain setting it is, looking all around with all these major peaks of the Karakoram. The reason we actually ended up having to descend here is because we had to walk along this fluted ridge of snow. But after Mark walks out here just a little bit, he fell through this hole. The snow was very, very bad conditions. It was, when you stepped on the snow, it had no solid footing to it. You just fell out the bottom. And you can see he's digging this big hole because he just keeps falling out the bottom. And the snow conditions were quite dangerous, so we came down. And we made a lot of rappels coming down to get back to the glacier. After that trip, I think that the political situation in Pakistan for me was getting a little uncomfortable. There was a little bit too much political violence going on in that part of the Karakoram, so we decided that we would try to go to the eastern Karakoram, which was on the other side of the line of control in Kashmir to India. And so even though it's in the same range and not very far away, you know, over there you can see it says K2 in the middle of the slide. Over there it says Karakoram Pass, and if you go down where you can see where it says Shayok, there's a bunch of peaks in the Indian administered part of Kashmir where we went. And you fly to Leh, and Leh is an interesting town because they have an interesting combination of several religions. They've got a mosque there, but they also have some beautiful Tibetan Buddhist monasteries as well. Because the Indus River at Leh and on the other side the Shayok River, the ridge where you would normally drive up the river valleys is blocked because from India you can't drive into Pakistan. So the Indians have built a road over the Kardung Law. It's an 18,000 foot high pass. And there's a conflict going along on the Siachen Glacier, and the Indians are using the road over the Kardung Law to transport all of their military equipment in the summertime to supply their troops up on the Siachen. And that's the same road that we're taking to go to the peak that we climbed. This is in 2011. Actually made 2 attempts. One in 2009, we didn't succeed. And then we came back in 2011 and were successful. But this is the peak that we went to climb. It's called Sasser Kangri 2. The summit's up on the right. This peak is over 7,500 meters high and had never been climbed before. So we wanted to try to make the first ascent. And it's quite a treacherous hike in there. We had these young porters carrying things for us, but we had to watch them carefully because some places we had to put ropes there for them so that they could hang on to and not fall because it was a big steep drop off down into the river. But above the gorge, at the beginning of the trek, we get into a little easier terrain, and we built a beautiful base camp in a meadow at about 17,000 feet. And none of these places have ever been explored before. These glaciers and passes that were going on this trip actually had never, in any of the research that I'd done, no humans had ever been to this part of the world before. You could see it on Google Earth, but no one had ever been there. And we had to go up this glacier and over this pass, this 6,000 meter pass, to even get to the peak that we wanted to climb. So it was quite a long journey just to get to the mountain, given that it was such a remote area. This is my friend Mark Ritchie from Massachusetts, who I did this trip with. And in 2009, we made an attempt. We got up into this rocky area. We chopped this ledge out of the ice for our tents, but then the weather got bad, so we ended up retreating in 2009. But then I came back again in 2011 with my friend Mark again, and a different climber, a young guy named Freddie Wilkinson. And we teased Freddie because he's half our age, but he has the gray hair. And we went back up, and we had this was the only place we could put the tent that was flat. After that, we had to build places to put the tent because the mountain is too steep. We had better conditions in 2011. We could climb quite rapidly. We actually got to our high point from 2009, and it was only lunchtime. And when we were there on the second day, in 2009, we got here at the end of the day, so we were moving a lot more quickly. And then we had a new way to build a tent platform. We use these little nylon tarps where we can fill the snow in behind them and make a flat place for the tent. You can see the wall of snow below there with the blue tarps that are anchored into the sides and filled in behind with snow. And that was the only way we could get a flat place for the tent, and even then you can see the tents kind of hanging over the edge. But that's how, and this is the way we went. We climbed up from our advanced base camp to 6,000 meters at the one place I said we had the only flat place for a ledge we call the launch pad. Then you can see our 2009 high point, and then our Camp 2 was that last picture where we built the bivouac, and then we climbed last part of the steep climbing through a place we called the Escape Hatch, and had one more bivouac, and then the next day, on our fourth day, we went to the summit and made the first ascent of Sasser Kangri 2. And from the summit here, we're looking west across the line of control. All those big mountains you see in the background, they were all in Pakistan. Yeah, it's a little bit hard to see in that photo. One of the problems I had coming down was I got sick, and you can see in the picture here I don't really look very, very happy. And we ended up, I was able to make all the rappels down the face and got all the way to the bottom, but at the end we called for an Indian army came in and gave me a helicopter ride out because I was really quite ill. And but then they took me to the little hospital there in Leh and checked me out, and I ended up recovering, and I was just fine. But I did owe a lot of gratitude to Mark Ritchie's wife, Teresa, and my friend Motip, who lives there in Leh and has a trekking agency there in Leh. I just thought I would kind of real quickly show, there are these websites that militaries from like India, Pakistan, these other countries, I mean, they have it in the United States too, where if something like, their Air Force, does a mission like this, they write about it on these websites. And so my dad found this article about the Indian Air Force flying into the glacier and getting me when I was sick. And so my father, they had comments, and so my father, his name's Howard, he writes in, thanking them, saying that, the officers for coming and getting in, that our family's very appreciative of that. And I just threw this in here because it's an indication of how much mutual suspicion there is between India and Pakistan over all of this, because then these Indian commenters wrote in saying that they thought that my father was a spy. You know, that he was trying to get information about the Indian Air Force officers because he might be a spy, which was completely ridiculous, because this is my father. He's not a spy. And so my father made a joke out of it, saying that now you can just call me 008 because 007 is taken. And it goes both ways. It's, you know, I see that all the time, that, you know, the Indians are very suspicious, and then so the Pakistanis are too. And it's a big mess there in Kashmir because there's no trust, and there's a lot of, you know, frustration on both sides. The last little bit of I'm going to talk about is a trip I took last year in 2015 to some unclimbed peaks over near the line of control between India and Pakistan in the Karakoram. And we flew from Islamabad to Skardu, which is kind of the jumping off point for most of these expeditions in Baltistan. This is my friend Graham. And I threw this picture in here because from the jet, when we're flying from Islamabad to Skardu, you go right by Nanga Parbat, and this big long ridge on the right-hand side of Nanga Parbat as you're going by in the jet, that's the Mazeno Ridge that we did the first ascent of the Mazeno Ridge in 2004. And Skardu sits here. It's a beautiful oasis on the side of the Indus River. And our team that year, from left to right, was Iqbal was kind of helping us do some load carrying at the beginning of the trip, and then myself and Graham. And this is my friend Rasul now I've been on every trip in Pakistan since 1987. He's like my brother. You know, we help each other, and families know each other, and he's an awesome guy. And then Scott Bennett, and then Nadeem is Rasul's son-in-law. And this is just Rasul and I just having a nice reunion for this trip. One of the differences on this trip for us was that in 2013, some climbers were at the Nanga Parbat base camp in the Daimler Valley, and some militants had come over from the tribal areas and had walked up to the base camp and had killed 11 people, 10 foreign climbers and 1 Pakistani cook. And it was a terrible, terrible attack on Westerners by the militants. And so after that, now the Pakistanis have been assigning police officers to the expeditions to try to keep us safe. And this was the guy who was watching over us when we were in Skardu doing all of our provisioning. You know, the usual bad roads, but we got up to the village of Hushe, where Rasul lives and his family is, and we could talk all evening about the village and his family, but maybe some other time. The village of Hushe is beautiful. It's sitting underneath in the shadow of Masherbrum, which is the peak in the background. That's over 25,000 feet high, and just right up behind the village. It's an amazing, amazing place. This is Nadeem and his 2 sons, and Nadeem was our assistant cook this year. Nadeem doesn't know how to read or write. He doesn't speak English because when he was small, his father died when he was 10, and he had to raise his brothers and sisters. He had to work so that his brothers and sisters could go to school. And so his younger brothers and sisters learned to read and write and to speak English, but he didn't because he had to work to send them to school because he had to support the family. He's an amazing guy. We hired all our porters here, just in the next village down from Hushe, and trekked into base camp. This is just showing Graham and me making little piles of money to pay our porters when we were done. Because when the porters get to the end and they drop your loads at the base camp, they want to leave right away. So you have to have, it saves time if you have the money all counted out into little piles of how much each person gets. So we had a beautiful base camp here up in the boulders, up in the Nongma Valley. And you can see way in the background, in the left of center, that granite tower that's in the sun. This granite tower is called Changi Tower, and it was unclimbed. It was 6,500 meter high granite tower that at the time, no one had ever climbed it yet. So that was our objective, was to try to do that. Nadim and why am I forgetting his name now? Nadim and I'll remember in a second here. They helped us carry some loads up to, we had to go over a pass right there to the glacier on the other side. And then on the other side, we had to carry loads and haul duffel bags up to an advanced base camp that we had on the glacier on the other side. It's kind of like what we had to do on Sasser Kangri too. The reason why the peak was unclimbed is hard to get to. And logistically, we had to bring a bunch of stuff over to a glacier on the other side to set up another camp over there to base out of, to be able to do it. So we built this advanced base camp here, and with enough supplies to kind of keep us going out of that for a while. And then the big granite tower here, this is just a close-up of the upper 2,000 feet. You can see it's quite steep and technical. And this tower had never been climbed before. We ended up climbing, you can see those snowy mixed ice and ramps kind of on the left side. To get up to the tower, we had to climb up through this really nasty glacier icefall that probably took us a couple of days just to figure out how to go around all these towers of ice, and there's big crevasses. And once we figured out the pathway through it, around the crevasses and around all the towers and the steep sections, we could do it in 2 hours. But it was kind of like a, it was kind of like a corn maze, for all of you that are, going to the corn mazes right now for Halloween. It was sort of like a corn maze made out of ice and tilted up at a steep angle. We finally got to the top, but then, we had several storms, so we had to go all the way back to base camp, and it was about 2 weeks before we actually ended up getting back above that ice fall. And while we were there, we're hanging out, and Rasul and Nadim are cooking for us, keeping us healthy and strong. And we finally get back up there when the weather gets better, and climbing up in the shadow of the tower, we get up to the pass, and we start up the route. The first day, we got all the way up to this mixed ice and rock, and we built a, and above that it's just steep rock climbing, so there's really not a good place to put the tent after that. So we chopped and used one of those tarps again to build a platform here for the tiny little tent that we used for the night. And then the next day we had to go as quickly as we could, because we wanted to be able to get to the summit and back down to that tent before it got dark. Otherwise, we'd have to spend the night out, and it would be quite cold and miserable, and we didn't want to freeze all night. So we moved very quickly on the steep ground, and I'm twice the age of the two young guys I was with, so they were doing most of the leading because they're faster than I am now. The major feature that we climbed near the top, we called it the Big Dihedral, which is like big. Thank you. It's like a big granite corner, and this was the crux to the route. Was we climbed up this corner. That's me at the bottom. Then Graham and Scott took this picture. He led all the way up this rock and ice to get up to where we went off to the left. And this is looking over to the north, all the other beautiful mountains there surrounding us in the Karakoram. We're actually just on the other side of the glacier to the east from the Mazeno Ridge, which is the line where the Indians and the Pakistanis are faced off in Kashmir. And it's just crazy that the two armies are faced off in all these bunkers along the Mazeno Ridge. A lot of these bunkers are at 6,000 meters, and they have soldiers in them 24/7. We got to the summit just at dark and ended up rappelling down in the dark and got back to our tent about 2, 3 in the morning. The next day we descended all the way back down into the little pocket glacier below the tower and spent another night there, where we had beautiful views off to the west with that big peaks called Almond Brock. And the other objective that we had was we wanted to climb this face on K6 Central, which is a 7,000 meter peak that's still unclimbed, but we decided not to because that buttress in the middle that we thought would keep us safe didn't extend all the way to the bottom. And you can see this is a huge avalanche coming off that big cliff of ice just to the right and below the summit. And so if you were anywhere nearby when something like that happens, you wouldn't survive an avalanche like that. So we decided that route wasn't safe. So after we got back to base camp and had a celebration of our success on Changi Tower, Graham and Scott, I decided not to go, climbed a new route that sort of left Skyline to K6 West, and they were going to try to traverse over to K6 Central and do the first ascent of that peak. But unfortunately, the weather turned bad on them after they got to the top of K6 West. So the K6 Central still unclimbed. So for any of you that want to go climb an unclimbed 7,000 meter peak, you can go try to climb K6 Central. It's still unclimbed. And Graham and Scott after they got back. So we walked out from there, and we had to do a little bit of first aid on some of the porters who got scraped up and sprained their ankles. When we got back to Houché, I'm guessing maybe, how old maybe you think this kid's like 8 or 9. He broke his humerus by falling off the roof of his house. And so Graham's an EMT, so he's splinting this little boy's arm and trying to keep him from, kind of cheered up. And then we took him to the hospital the next day on our way back to Skardu. After spending 30 years climbing in the Karakoram, I just hope that someday we can reach that the countries there can reach some kind of settlement over Kashmir, because the conflict there is making it difficult for security. There's a lot of political violence associated with it, so that none of the trekkers and climbers will go, and the people in the village suffer because then they don't have any trekking business. And there's a lot of casualties. These are Pakistani soldiers that are manning these bases in very, in some cases, kind of primitive conditions. Just with shelters made out of fuel drums and tarps and jerry cans, and trying to stay warm over a kerosene stove. Then there's a group of contractors who are supplying the soldiers up on the front and the Pakistan side. And they have a lot of casualties, not necessarily from the fighting, because they've had a ceasefire for the most part since 2003, but the weather, the avalanches, the crevasses, high altitude, sickness, there's a lot of soldiers who die as a result of that. And it's the same on the other side. This is a group of Indian soldiers who are about ready to be shipped out to go up onto the Siachen Glacier, where again they suffer from a lot of the same hardships that the soldiers suffer on the Pakistan side. Little plaques like this are just all too common, that you see both sides, from soldiers who've been killed there. I would hope that I live to see the day that there's a peaceful settlement of the situation, and so that we can all go hiking and trekking and climbing there without all these concerns about security and violence. That's my show. Thank you for coming.